So today we're going to talk about distance measuring equipment, DME. So how does DME actually work? Well, it's another one of these bits of equipment that measures the time it takes for something to travel to and from something. And because we can measure very precisely that time, we can work out how far we are away because we know the speed of light and the speed of radio waves. So what we basically have is we've got our aeroplane with some sort of ground station. The aircraft transmits a pulse to the ground station that the ground station receives, and it sends back a corresponding pulse to the aircraft. And depending on how long it took for this to go all the way to here and all the way back, we can then work out with the box of electronics in the plane how far away the plane is from this aerial. Now, DME works in the UHF band, not the VHF band. The UHF is the next one above VHF, and it works in the range of 962 to 1213 megahertz with 1 megahertz spacing. That gives about 250 frequencies available. Now the signal coming down and the signal going back up are on two different frequencies. So of this 250 frequencies, we've actually got 126 channels available to us, because each channel uses two frequencies. Now, the great thing is that we don't need to know what all of these channels and frequencies are, because they're paired with VOR frequencies, because all DMEs are generally co-located with a VOR station. So by selecting the VOR frequency in your VOR receiver, we automatically select the appropriate DME channel, and the DME channel, of course, knows which of the two frequencies it's going to use. So this is really, really nice and simple from an aviation perspective. But don't forget that when we're selecting the VOR frequency, we aren't selecting, although we're selecting the DME frequency, that isn't the frequency the DME operates off. The DME has its own unique set of frequencies in the UHF waveband. Now, the other thing to not be confused about is that anything that receives a signal, a radio signal, and sends a signal back is called a transponder. So DME is working around a transponder. But although this is working exactly the same as the SSR radar transponder, in that, you know, it receives a pulse and it sends out another pulse. This transponder, although it's called a transponder, is working in a completely different way to the radar transponder, although it's basically doing the same job. So when you hear of DME transponder, or you hear of the transponder associated with DME, it is a different type of transponder to the SSR transponder that we all are familiar with. So a few kind of technical things is that you could probably imagine this scenario where we've got many planes operating. They're all sending out these interrogation pulses. I need to know how far away I am, and of course the DME transponder sends out another pulse that goes, as soon as it gets this one, it goes bing, it says, and of course you can then measure the time it takes. But you've probably already spotted the flaw in the design, in that it can't be quite that straightforward, because when we send out this return pulse, well, all the aircraft that's kind of using this same DME are all going to get the same return pulse, and they'll go, oh, wait a minute, yeah, 1 second I was this far away, now I'm this far away, because it's getting all these return pulses mixed up. So life is not quite this straightforward. What actually happens is that the aircraft initially communicates with the DME by sending out a signal to the DME that says, hi, I want to use you. And the DME kind of processes this information and says, okay, fair enough, you are plane number 3 or whatever. And then once it's been assigned its own little unique number, then the plane then says, okay, I'm plane number 3. And then the transponder here replies back with, okay, plane number 3, here's your pulse back. So each aircraft is allocated its unique number, if you like, and each aircraft has its own unique interrogating pulse and its own unique return pulse, so that they don't all get mixed up. Each DME can handle about 100 aircraft. Before they become what's called saturated. In other words, there's a finite number of aircraft that they can actually physically reply back to. And the way they choose these 100 aircraft is very simple. They just work on the fact that the 100 most strongest signals that they're receiving from the aircraft. So, you know, if you've got if it's approaching saturation and another plane comes along and it just happens to be closer or higher or in better range of the ground station, the ground station will throw you off and allocate your number to somebody else. Now, probably about 20 years ago, maybe 25 years ago, there were quite a few DMEs in the UK that were actually saturated. I mean, the London DME was extremely oversaturated, and anything more than about 20 miles away from the London DME, you couldn't actually use it, just purely because it was just completely saturated. But nowadays you tend to find that because a lot of people have switched to GPS, there isn't this same DME requirement. And I've never come across scenarios where, certainly in recent history, where you've got this saturation of DMEs and you find that you can't actually use them. So one of the things to notice is that the DME is not actually in reality telling you how far away ground-wise you are from the station, because you're sending this pulse and it's sending you this pulse back. So what you finish up is the distance you are away from the actual aerial of the station, your aerial from its aerial, and we call this the slant distance. So even if you fly straight over the top of the DME and you're right here over the top of the DME station, and you're sort of like 5,000–6,000 feet above it, and you're right on top of it, well, you're still actually a nautical mile away, aren't you? Because you're still, you know, even when you're actually directly above it, you're still 1 nautical mile away, because you're 1 nautical mile in the air. So you can see that unlike VORs and NDB ADF combinations, there's no cone of confusion, you know, when you're overhead. They don't sort of, you know, there isn't this passage as you get immediately over the top where the needle suddenly has to flick from one, from like straight ahead to straight behind, or whether it sort of goes to, and then it sort of goes, and then it says up you're from. A DME will always be working without any confusion, because it's always measuring your distance, no matter where you are relative to the DME. So how do we actually use the DME in the cockpit? Well, there's various DME equipment, but normally you've got something very similar to any of the normal equipment in the stack. The only difference is, of course, that we know that the frequency is automatically paired with VOR, so we don't have a means of changing the frequency. So your DME box will probably have, it might have an on-off, and it might have some sort of like volume control. Normally all combined into one simple button. And just like using a VOR, what you do is you look at your COM panel along the top, your intercom COM panel. The top row will probably say phones, this will probably say speaker or whatever. And you look along here until you see the button that says DME. You press the DME button and you listen for the DME ident. So, for example, if you're listening out for, say, the Pathos DME, which would be Papa Hotel Alpha, you'll be getting P, which will be doo doo. That won't. It will be doo 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 doo. Then it'll be H Hotel, which will be doo 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 doo, 4 dots, and it'll be Alpha, which will be doo doo dash. So you'll check the ident, and of course once you've checked the ident, you can turn this button off, and you can actually use the DME. So how do you tell where the DMEs are on the ground? Well, the DMEs are normally co-located with the VORs. So by co-located, you normally find that this great big huge VOR, and I mean VORs are massive. The ground station for a VOR. I mean, some of them are like 30, 40 foot in diameter. I mean, they're just ginormous constructions of just loads and loads of aerials and things sticking up and strange objects and bits. But the DME is just a small box. I mean, it's just a box that big with an aerial that big sticking up out the top of it. It's like, So generally you find that sometimes just off to one side of the VOR, built into the VOR itself, in amongst all the structures of aerials, you've got like a little aerial sticking up, or quite often just off to one side, only sort of like 4 or 5 metres away, you'll have another little kind of like building or a little shed or something, which has also got all the electronics for the VOR in it, and then maybe there's like on the top of this is another aerial, and that's your DME aerial. And you can tell them because on the chart you'll have a VOR which would, and of course that might say something like Charlie Papa Tango 114.35, and if it's a co-located VOR DME, in other words, if it's got a DME that's built into this thing, it has a box around it, looks like this. So it has this rectangle around it, and it also says underneath here, it will say DME, which means it's also got the distance measuring equipment in. So that's how you tell this hexagon, which is the VOR, and this extra rectangle all the way around shows you that it's a DME, and it also says DME. Of course, there's not a DME frequency because the frequency, although it's not 114.35, built into the electronics of your DME receiver, it knows that 114.35 is whatever channel that is, and it knows that whatever channel it is, what frequencies that corresponds to actually use the DME. So on our DME receiver that's built into the plane, we've also got some things. Obviously we've got the basic DME itself, so it will say something like, it will have a window that says 25.2 nautical miles, or whatever. So you can always tell how far away you are from the DME, but it'll also have some extra things as well, besides just how far away. Sometimes it will also give you here your ground speed. We'll have another window that says your ground speed, and it will have another window that says your time to go. So this will be like, it might say 120 knots, and it will say time to go maybe sort of 12 minutes or whatever. And as you're approaching DME, obviously this will be going down, and this will be going down. So a nice thing is that if you're routing towards a DME and air traffic control asks you for an estimate, you can just quickly look at your time to go here, and you can just immediately tell how far you've got to run to the DME. Now, of course, you've got to be a little careful here in that this only works really, your ground speed and your time to go, if you're actually going directly to the DME itself. You can probably imagine that if you're transiting the DME, you know, like if here's the DME and you're transiting across here, well, your ground speed really isn't that useful, and your time to go really isn't that useful, because obviously your ground speed's going to decrease, and then it will increase along this line. So how can we use this for VOR navigation? Well, of course, the first really big feature of DME is that combined with the VOR, is you can find where you are at any point in time, because if we know from the VOR what radial we're on, let's say we're on the let's say the 045 radial, and we know how far away we are, let's say we're 20 nautical miles away on the DME, then we know exactly where we are, and we can physically get our protractor and measure out, couldn't we? And we could actually align this. There we go, and we could measure it, and we could say, oh, that's exactly where we are. Doink, and we could put a mark on the map. So I mean, they are really, really useful because they are a means of very, very quickly to know exactly where you are. And of course, we can use a DME in very much the same way for visual navigation. Even if we're not routing directly via the VORs, we can actually know how far away from the VOR we actually are. So we could say, for example, if we, instead of being here, if we were, if we had this as a waypoint, for example, then we could actually be monitoring where we were relative to the VOR. If we're passing up here, and when we cross the 045 radial, we could see how far away we are relative to it, and that would tell us then, as we cross the 045, we could then see whether or not we were here, or how far away we actually are, and we could get an idea of any errors in our navigation. You normally find it's easier to wait until your radial comes up and then quickly look at your DME and write that on your plog, and then you can then work out where you are left and right, and this is normally the best way of doing it from a VFR perspective. It's not normally a good idea to find your distance, wait until the distance comes up and then work out what radial it is, because you can't on a map kind of visualise that. But on a map you can always draw the 045 radial, wait until you cross it, pick a radial, obviously you're going to cross at roughly 90 degrees, and then as you cross that radial you can then quickly see how far away you are, and in your head you can very easily then sort of say, oh, hang on, I'm 18, this is meant to be 20 and I'm actually 18, which means that in reality my real position is here. So although I was meant to be here, my real position is here, which means that you know that if you you'd say, oh, hang on, I need to just, if that's, I'm a mile or two short here, that means I need to sort of like come sort of 5 degrees to the right or something as a course correction. So that's really how a DME works. So before we finish this, I ought to mention one last thing, which you'll come across. It's not part of the PPL syllabus, but I'll just mention it. And that's RNAV. And what RNAV is, it's a way you can create waypoints using a mixture of VOR radials and DME combinations. So in other words, you can pick any spot and you can measure what radial it is from the nearest VOR and how far away it is from the VOR, and you can actually express where that is by the VOR radial and the corresponding DME from that VOR. And we call that RNAV, is an RNAV waypoint. And there are quite a lot of equipment and a lot of technology in planes nowadays where you can actually set these points up as physical waypoints you can fly to. So in other words, that we don't have to fly to a physical VOR DME anymore. What happens is that we can set up these RNAV waypoints based on VOR DME, and we can fly to and from these waypoints, which means we don't have this danger of all the aircraft converging on top of a VOR station.